WWE star never wants to have a disappointing match. I mean, they shouldn't want to anyway, but it happens. You can get away with it at a live event or even on television, since there's always a chance to redeem yourself right around the corner. WrestleMania, however, is different, since it only happens once a year and is far and away WWE's biggest and most important event, where more eyes are on the product than at any other point in the calendar. A performer can consistently deliver the goods 364 days out of the year, but if they have a stinker at the granddaddy of them all, that is, perhaps cruelly, the one thing that will be talked about ahead of all others. There is so much hype and expectation with every WrestleMania that it's inevitable that a match or two will fail to live up to what fans and management and the wrestlers themselves are looking for. A big WrestleMania disappointment can, regretfully for those involved, be remembered as much as a WrestleMania classic. And no, I'm not helping with videos like this, am I? Anyway, I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 most disappointing WrestleMania matches. Join us! Number 10, Batista vs UMAGA at WrestleMania 24. What a difference a year makes. At WrestleMania 23, Batista and UMAGA were two of the biggest stars on the show in two of the most hyped matches. The Animal defended the World Heavyweight title against The Undertaker in his streak, while the Samoan Bulldozer represented the owner of World Wrestling Entertainment in the Battle of the Billionaires. Fast forward to Mania 24, and the two men were an afterthought, booked together in an inter-promotional clash for brand supremacy or something. Adding to the insult, they were sent out third, immediately following the exciting Money in the Bank ladder match and given a measly 7 minutes to play with. The two powerhouses could have an awesome hoss fight since they both had the talent and the ability to do so, but their hearts clearly weren't in it. They had no reason to be there and were just filling a space on the card, and they knew it. It was by the numbers fair, and it failed to match even the modest expectations placed on it. Summing it all up was the bungled finish, as a noticeably miffed Big Dave messed up the match-winning Batista bomb. Number 9, Triple H vs. The Rock vs. The Big Show vs. Mick Foley at WrestleMania 2000. The main event of WrestleMania 16 should have been Triple H defending the WWE title against Royal Rumble winner The Rock in a singles match. I should also have £10 million in my bank account, but sometimes reality has fantasy beat. WWE would have booked the match had Rock and Show not messed up the Rumble finish, as the Great One's feet hit first and the world's largest athlete then won his way into the Mania main event. They decided to add in the just-retired Mick Foley as a way to give old Cactus a much-deserved WrestleMania moment, and oh, just look at that! We can also have a McMahon in every corner, can't we? How wonderful. The game defending against Foley, Rocky, and Showy should have been a grand spectacle, but the truth is the action, for large parts of the contest, was just okay. Show was eliminated fairly early, with Foley going next after nearly knocking himself out with an attempted elbow drop through the announce table. That left the Brahma Bull and the Cerebral Assassin, the pace picking up some before Vince McMahon turned on Rock and enabled Triple H to leave WrestleMania as the first heel in history to retain his title in the show closer. A disappointing end to a disappointing match on a disappointing show. Number 8, Brock Lesnar vs. The Undertaker at WrestleMania 30. Brock Lesnar and The Undertaker had put on plenty of amazing matches together in the past. Their 2002 and 2003 series of bouts, especially their Hell in a Cell match, were fondly remembered, and their match at WrestleMania 30 had been built up well thanks to segments like the contract signing, where the dead man put a pen through the Beast's actual hand. A signature would have sufficed, Mr. Calloway. One of the big draws of Mania that year, things felt a little bit off from the beginning as the two men found it hard to settle into a proper rhythm. It came to light later that Taker had been dinged early on, landing on his head when he took a bad bump on the floor and suffering a concussion as a result. Because of that, the action was rather sluggish and the fans failed to properly get into it. Another reason the live crowd might have been half asleep during the contest was because Undertaker's WrestleMania winning streak was so well established at this point, and the feeling was that nobody, not even Brock, could end it. Boy, were their faces red, well, more wide-eyed and slack-jawed, when Lesnar became the 1 in 21-1. The shocking 3 count is a timeless moment that will live on forever, but everything leading up to it was ponderous. Number 7, AJ Styles vs. Shinsuke Nakamura at WrestleMania 34. AJ Styles vs. Shinsuke Nakamura for the WWE title at WrestleMania. How could that not be one of the best things ever? Two of the best workers in the world on the grandest stage fighting over the top prize. The match was basically sold as a dream match, and the expectation going into the show was that it would be the best match on it. Not only had they consistently delivered the goods in WWE rings, but they also had history together too, previously putting on classics against one another in New Japan. On the night, the Phenomenal One and the King of Strong Style had a match that was simply good. It was decent. It was fine. Not bad, enjoyable, had its moments, good enough for government work, but not great. Considering who was involved and how fans were basically promised pro wrestling perfection, this fell way short. Adding to the disappointment was Shinsuke after winning the Rumble, blowing it on the big stage and losing the match, especially after his female counterpart Asuka had done the same earlier in the night against Charlotte Flair. Thankfully, Naka smacked Styles in the, knackers, giving him a bit more of an edge for the rematches. Number 6, Triple H versus Chris Jericho at WrestleMania 18. Triple H's comeback from a torn quadriceps in early 2002 was a sight to behold. The game had gone down with the injury in the spring of 01 and rehabbed extra hard, soundtracked by U2's Beautiful Day, and turned himself babyface through sheer perseverance and the magic of video packages. His Madison Square Garden return was accompanied by one of the most thunderous reactions ever, and his Royal Rumble triumph ensured his path to the WrestleMania main event. Unfortunately, a certain hot dog-skinned egomaniac showed up and was booked in an intergenerational dream match with the biggest star in the industry, stealing the limelight from the King of Kings. It didn't help that his opponent Chris Jericho was mostly treated as a joke and relegated to cleaning up the mess made by Hunter's dog Lucy while playing second fiddle to Stephanie McMahon. Everyone knew that Rock vs. Hogan was the real main event, yet Triple H insisted that he and Y2J go on last because their bout was for the WWE title. Big mistake. After the Hulkster and Dwayne rocked the Sky Dome, pun intended, with their awesome spectacle, nobody had a hope of following them. And while Triple H and Chris Jericho are obviously both great workers, the fans weren't too bothered after all the posing and people's elbows. The upshot was that they had a so-so main event and Triple H's title coronation fell flat. Number 5, Dean Ambrose versus Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 32. Leading up to Brock Lesnar and Dean Ambrose's street fight at WrestleMania 32, it was heavily implied that somebody might get decapitated or, at the very least, lose an arm. Now, that's a possibility every time Lesnar wrestles, of course, but the lunatic fringe spent weeks talking about the lengths that he would go to maim and injure the beast incarnate, even going so far as to introduce a chainsaw and barbed wire baseball bat as would-be weapons. Fans were salivating at the potential carnage, since Ambrose was clearly willing to suffer for the cause, and Brock, when motivated, is more than happy to inflict such suffering. Regrettably, the Brock Lesnar that turned up that day in Texas wasn't really asked, probably because his match was slap bang in the middle of the card, and also, it would later transpire, because he was secretly planning a return to UFC. He was hardly going to risk his health by being put through a flaming table when a fight in the octagon was in the works, was he? The match was mediocre and didn't deliver on the promise of violence, with Ambrose himself going on record as saying how disappointed he was with it, putting most of the blame on Lesnar and his refusal to do, well, anything. Number 4, The Undertaker versus Big Boss Man at WrestleMania 15. When WWE booked The Undertaker in a Hell in a Cell match at WrestleMania 15, they had a short but very powerful legacy to live up to. The Phenom had competed in the previous 2 proper Cell bouts, both of which were legendary for their own reasons. His match with Shawn Michaels at Bad Blood 97 had a bit of everything, featured 2 amazing performances, and was capped off by the debut of Kane, while his King of the Ring 98 match with Mankind was one of the most awe-inspiring scenes ever witnessed on a wrestling show, as Foley risked life and limb with 2 terrifying bumps, and then some. You could see why WWE put Taker in there with Bossman, since the cell was sort of like a prison, meaning it was apropos for the man from Cobb County, Georgia, and it was at this point turning into one of the Dead Man's signature bouts. While nobody expected Ray Traylor to match HBK's performance or take a bump like Mrs. Foley's baby boy, they certainly expected more than what they got. It was clunky, boring, and silly, and the fans didn't really care since both were heels at the time. Undertaker won to maintain his streak and then celebrated by hanging his opponent from the arena ceiling. Lovely. Number 3, Shawn Michaels vs Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 14. There was no stopping the Stone Cold Steve Austin train in 1998. The Texas Rattlesnake was the only candidate to win the Rumble, which he did, and it was a sure bet that he was going to stomp mudholes all the way to winning the WWE title in the main event of WrestleMania 14. And who better to win your first WWE title from than Shawn Michaels, one of the premier performers of his or any era, a man who made it his mission to steal the show, whether he was wrestling in Danville, Kentucky, or the main event of the biggest show of the year. No offense, Danville. Sadly, the showstopper was heading into his title showdown with Austin feeling something far less than 100%. HBK had injured his back in the Royal Rumble casket match with Undertaker and was in agony, with doctors recommending he undergo potentially career-ending surgery. Fair play to Michaels, who showed up in Boston and gave it his all, doing the job for Austin despite the fact that he shouldn't have been taking any bumps. He put in a hell of a shift under the circumstances, but the match itself didn't set the world on fire, as, try as he may, this wasn't the same Shawn Michaels that could put on a clinic in his sleep or under the influence of a pharmacy stockroom. The Austin era had begun, but it did so with a match that was disappointing, especially to those who didn't know the full story. Number 2, Goldberg vs Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 20. The moment Bill Goldberg signed his WWE contract in 2003, the creative staff were already brainstorming how to get him in a match with Brock Lesnar. The next big thing had taken WWE by storm in Goldbergian fashion, decimating the roster in rapid succession as he quickly established himself as the man. Naturally, the man versus Lesnar would make for a blockbuster showdown, and WWE booked it for WrestleMania 20. The 20th Mania was a big one, with a huge media campaign behind it and its Madison Square Garden setting ensuring that it would feel extra special. The perfect place for this clash of the titans, who had engaged in a very entertaining inter-brand feud, or so you would think. Goldberg's decision to not re-sign with WWE, coupled with Brock quitting the company days before the show, made them sellouts in the eyes of the New York faithful, who proceeded to mercilessly boo both, or else otherwise amuse themselves with derogatory and distracting chants. Steve Austin, caught in the middle as special guest referee, looked on bemused as the two behemoths stalled, did nothing, stalled some more, and then finally decided to make contact with each other, but it was all for naught. The match was rotten, and even if it had been good, the fans were out to sabotage it anyway. Luckily, Brocky and Billy got to redeem themselves 13 years later. Number 1, Triple H vs Randy Orton at WrestleMania 25. Triple H and Randy Orton's first feud, after the game had booted the Legend Killer out of Evolution in 2004, had been a rushed letdown. Orton was a terrible babyface at the time and flopped as World Heavyweight Champion, with Batista stepping into his spot and succeeding where he had failed. Fast forward a few years and Orton was on fire as a calculating and malicious heel, the Royal Rumble winner targeting WWE Champion Triple H. The two had a gripping feud, memorable for moments like Randy punting Vince McMahon in the head and RKOing Stephanie before planting a kiss on her unconscious cheek while the cerebral assassin looked on helplessly. Even Triple H's home invasion, while somewhat cheesy, had plenty of intensity and proved that their match deserved to go on last at the Showcase of the Immortals. Once again, however, Trips was completely upstaged, this time by Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, who had one of the best WWE matches ever earlier on in the card and burned the crowd out. Not helping matters was a stipulation that said Triple H could lose his title via disqualification, something that certainly wasn't in keeping with the tone of the rivalry. As a consequence, the Viper and the King of Kings had a listless slog of a match that lacked any of the drama or spark that had made their program so engaging.